What's up, everybody? This is the Hedge Mage, and welcome back to another video. So, as of last week, spoiler season is pretty much officially started for Magic the Gathering's newest standard legal set, Outlaws of Thunder Junction. There's a bunch of new comments being printed here, as per usual with any standard set. So, today we're gonna be just rounding up, so to speak, uh, everything that got previewed or spoiled over this last week and just kind of do some initial thoughts on each card. Not going to spend too much time, not any in-depth analysis of them, but just kind of looking at them and what they do. If that sounds interesting to you, definitely stick around. As always, if you enjoy the content that I create, if you could leave a like on this video and subscribe to the channel, I would greatly appreciate the support. And with that said, let's get into it. First card is Armored Armadillo for 1 white. You get a Armadillo. Believe it's a new creature type. It has a Ward 1. Ward is definitely a very good ability. And it also has an activated ability of 3 generic mana and 1 white. Armored Armadillo gets plus X plus O until end of turn, where X is its toughness. It is a 0/4. Honestly think this is somewhat playable, though I'm not really sure where it goes. Next up is a Black Snag Buzzard, 2 colorless and a black. You get a bird, has flying. Black Snag Buzzard enters the battlefield with a +1/+1 counter on it if a creature died this turn. It also has plot for 1 generic and a black. You may pay 1 generic and a black and exile this card from your hand. Cast it as a sorcery on a later turn without paying its mana cost. Plot as a sorcery. So it gets cast from exile, which is kind of interesting. I think there are some cards in this set that do sort of synergize with not casting cards from your hand. So kind of interesting card, though at the 3 mana point, I doubt we'll see this getting played very much. Next, we got Boneyard Desecrator for 3 generic and a black. It is a zombie mercenary. Has Menace. For 1 generic and a black, you can sacrifice another creature. Put a +1/+1 counter on a Boneyard Desecrator. If an outlaw was sacrificed this way, create a treasure token. And reminder text here, assassins, mercenaries, pirates, rogues, and warlocks are outlaws. It is also a 3/4. So got some nice things here for aristocrat style play, though again, for mana, I don't think I'm going to be brewing with this card very soon. Our next card is a Bridled Big Horn for 3 generic and a white. You get a Sheep Mount. Mount is a new creature type, I think being debuted in this set. Has Vigilance. Whenever Bridled Bighorn attacks while saddled, create a 1/1 white sheep creature token. Has Saddle 2, which means you can tap any number of other creatures you control with total power 2 or more. This mount becomes saddled until the end of turn. Saddle only as a sorcery, and it is a 3/4. So Saddle is kind of, it seems a very similar to Crew from Vehicles, making where you can tap creatures to make those artifacts a creature. Now you get to do a sort of triggered ability when you saddle on these creatures. So that is kind of interesting. But generally, I think this card is a little weak for the format. Okay, we got Bristlepack Sentry for 1 generic and a green. It's a plant wolf. Plant creatures are kind of seems to be one of the major creature types from the set. This card has Defender. As long as you control a creature with power 4 or greater, Bristlepack Sentry can attack as though it didn't have Defender, and it is a 3/3. Pretty janky card, but does have a Defender, so technically it could go on walls, so I wouldn't see why you would. Next, we got Cact Tarantula for 4 generic and 2 green. It is a plant spider. It costs 1 less to cast if you control a desert. And there's a bunch of new deserts in this set, so definitely it seems to be would probably be very good and limited. It has a reach. Whenever Cact Tarantula becomes the target of a spell or ability an opponent controls, you may draw a card. It is a 6/5. This card could be a lot stronger, but it seems Like it definitely is very much powered down. It only being able to go down to 5 mana instead of 6 mana doesn't really seem like it's going to make any waves in the format at all, especially when you only get to draw a card when it's targeted by a spell or an ability an opponent controls. So definitely not something you can abuse very well. Next, we got Dance of the Tumbleweeds for one generic and a green. It's a sorcery, has spree, which means you can choose one or more additional costs. However, I don't believe that means you can choose the same additional cost more than once. I think you only get to choose each mode one time. And for one extra generic mana, you can search your library for a basic land card or a desert card, put it onto the battlefield, then shuffle. Or for an additional 3 generic mana, you can create an XX green elemental creature token where X is the number of lands you control. I honestly think this card is pretty interesting. Spree is definitely an interesting mechanic as it does give anything with additional modes on it. I'm always kind of looking at those cards because they can have a lot of versatility, and that's something that can be generally pretty good. All right, next we have Desperate Bloodseeker. For one generic and a black, you get a vampire with lifelink. Whenever Desperate Bloodseeker enters the battlefield, target player mills 2 cards. It is a 2/2. So definitely not as good as the Merfolk that's already. I believe that card just got downshifted actually, which is I think a little bit better since it has a Death Touch and you gain 2 life. So it doesn't have Life Link, but does have Death Touch, which makes it I think a much better card in my opinion. Not going to be running this card in any decks anytime soon, though when it comes to PDH piles, it might be a consideration. Okay, next up is Discerning Peddler. For one generic and a red. You get a human rogue. When Discerning Peddler enters the battlefield, you may discard a card. If you do, draw a card, and it is a 2/2. So kind of all right. It's not as good as Scrapwork Mutt, which has Unearth. So it definitely has some synergy with Madness, but probably isn't going to make the cut in that deck. Next, we have Jin of Fools Fall. For 4 generic and a blue, you get a Jin that has flying, also has a plot, 3 generic and a blue. So you could potentially cast this later after probably tapping out. Doesn't seem very good, though in a limited environment like a booster trap is probably pretty decent, and it is a 4/3. Next, we have Ariet's Lullaby. For one generic and a white. It's a sorcery. Destroy target tap creature. You gain 2 life. This card, I think this is somewhat playable. It would be, I think, much more playable if it was instant. Basically, it's a 2 mana removal spell in white, which isn't bad, though it being a sorcery definitely isn't something I'm going to be rushing to work into any of my decks. Okay, next we have Explosive Derailment. For one red. It is an instant. This also has spree, so for an additional 2 generic, Explosive Derailment deals 4 damage to target creature, or for an additional 2, destroy target artifact. So pretty alright, though a braid already is cheaper than this and basically does the same thing. You do get 1 less damage out of a braid, but I think I would much rather play that over this. Next we have Failed Fording. For one generic and a blue. It's an instant. Return target non-land permanent to its owner's hand. If you control a desert, surveil 1. Pretty I would say decently cost bounce spell, and it does synergize with deserts, and you get to surveil 1. Could possibly find a place in Turbo Fog piles, though I think that deck already has better cards, and why would you need to bounce stuff when you already have fog? So not really sure where this goes, though it is, I think, a decent card and definitely could be considered playable. I really don't know in exactly what deck you would play it in. Our next card is Fake Your Own Death. For one generic and a black. It's an instant. Until the end of turn, target creature gets +2/+0 and gains. When this creature dies, return to the battlefield tapped under its owner's control, and you create a treasure. So we got a new scam card in the format. Alright, so as of right now, this is probably the first card that we've looked at today that I'm actually like, this could go in some type of deck. We don't really have scam very much. There was a mono black scam that I deck that I think was kind of getting messed around with around the Lord of the Rings set. And that was a pretty interesting deck. It didn't really stick around. It was kind of a flash in the pan. Scam is definitely, I think, something that just needs more cards, though we keep getting more and more scam cards in the format, which is pretty cool. So this is just another one that we now have access to as brewers that want to brew around that kind of style of play. So definitely pretty excited about this card. Next, we have Gold Pan for 2 generic mana. It is an artifact equipment. When Gold Pan enters the battlefield, create a treasure token. Equipped creature gets +1/+1 and has an equip cost of 1. Well, this is pretty good. So ETB effects, always love them. It creates a treasure for 2 mana and also is an equipment that you can put on a creature. Equipment decks have, I think there was a long time ago in the format. I believe there was a Boros equipment deck that I'm not really sure how good it was. Because I mean, I did find some lists for it, but though they were a few years old, so I imagine that was a thing years ago. Since then, it seems to have completely dropped off of the meta. I wasn't really playing when Boros equipment was a thing, but definitely something that you could use. I mean, obviously, this is 2 artifacts for 2 mana, not as good as your inspectors, but or like say a blood fountain, but could maybe see play in a glitters pile. Pretty decent card. Next we have Hard Bristle Bandit for 1 generic and a green. We get a plant rogue and has tap, add 1 mana of any color. So we get a mana dork for 2 mana. And whenever you commit a crime, untap Hard Bristle Bandit. This ability triggers only once each turn. It is a 1/1. So basically, this card cannot be abused with the commit a crime mechanic. Unfortunately, I'd love this card if there was a way to make infinite mana with it. It would definitely make some waves in the format, I'm sure. Uh, it can make mana of any color, so that is cool. But, ultimately, it's a plant, so it's not going to work with elves. So I don't really see this being played. If this was an elf rogue, I'd probably have a different feelings about it, because then there is definitely a deck for it. Right now, I don't think there is. Next, we have Holy Cow for 2 generic and a white. We get an Ox Angel with Flash, Flying, and when Holy Cow enters the battlefield, you gain 2 life and scry 1. It is a 2/2. And oh, this card does is kind of funny just in its concept. I don't think it's really that good. Next, we have Inventive Wingsmith for 2 generic and a white. We get a dwarf artificer. So first off, just love seeing new dwarfs in Magic whatsoever. At the beginning of your end step, if you haven't cast a spell from your hand this turn and Inventive Wingsmith doesn't have a flying counter on it, put a flying counter on it, and it is a 2/4. So really, I think synergizes with I think it's the plot mechanic, since you can cast those spells from exile, so they don't get cast from your hand. And when that so at turn, if you can plot turn 2 and then turn 3, put this out, you can then have a 2/4 flyer. And the toughness is pretty good, especially in limited environments where a lot of games are decided by someone just hitting you over and over with like a 2/1 flyer. That is, at least from my experience playing limited, sometimes you just die to birds. Irascible Wolverine. 2 generic and a red, you get a Wolverine. When Irascible Wolverine enters the battlefield, exile the top card of your library until end of turn. You may play that card. Also has plot for 2 generic and a red. It is a 3/2. I think just with the mana cost, both in its mana value and with the plot costs, I don't think this card's going to see play. That's a lot. I mean, basically, you have to play this on, like, I don't know, turn 5 or 6 to even be able to play the card that you exiled. So not very mana efficient at all. Definitely would be surprised if we see this making its way into any decks. Okay, and next we have Jagged Barons. It's a desert. It enters the battlefield tapped. When Jagged Barons enters the battlefield, it deals 1 damage to target opponent. You can tap it for a black or a red. And this is just one of the new cycle of lands that are coming out in the format. All of them have a different color pair and they all have the same ability. They deal 1 damage to target opponent. And I didn't want to really spend much time showing all of them as there's really only one that I think is really going to see play, and that is this one. So that's the one we're going to talk about right now. I think anything like Pinger Burn, Rakdos Madness, or Mono Black Burn will could potentially play this card. More so Mono Black and Rakdos Madness because they do have run Bump in the Night, and they want to make sure they have their color fixing so they can play the for its flashback cost, especially Mono Blackburn. So I think this card is really good. Honestly, I think all the deserts are pretty good, though this was probably the main one that we will see in decks. Okay, next card is Lone Shark. You get a Shark Rogue. When Lone Shark enters the battlefield, if you've cast 2 or more spells this turn, draw a card. It has a plot cost of 3 generic and a blue, and is a 3/4. So honestly, pretty unplayable at the mana value and the plot cost. If the plot cost was maybe cheaper, though, then I don't think they would make it cheaper than its mana value, as because then you could just cheat it out earlier, and that's not probably something they want to do from a design perspective. But generally, I'm pretty non-pulsed about this card. Next, we got Mine Raider for 2 generic and a red. Get a human rogue with trample. When a Mine Raider enters the battlefield, if you control another outlaw, create a treasure token, and it is a 3/2. Could definitely see this in some PDH piles, especially ones that synergize with artifacts, though at the 3 mana cost, I would be surprised if we would see this in any decks, though treasure tokens are very good, so maybe some type of mid-range pile might like it. It is a 3/2 trample, so if you are running things like Monarch and the Initiative, this is definitely, I think, maybe something you could mess around with. We already see similar things with Jewel Thief, so it's a pretty alright card. I'm not really sure either way if this is playable or not. It definitely is, I think, worth taking a look at. Okay, and the last card that we're looking at in this video is Mystical Tether for 2 generic and a white. You may cast Mystical Tether as though it has flash. If you pay 2 more to cast it, it is an enchantment, and when Mystical Tether enters the battlefield, exile target artifact or creature an opponent controls until Mystical Tether leaves the battlefield. This card is okay. The fact that it's 3 mana makes me kind of less interested in it. It does exile artifacts, which that is something. You can take away your opponent's artifact lands, especially the indestructible ones. So that's cool. Probably more for PDH or limited, in my opinion. Don't think this is going to make it to into constructed at all, but it definitely does something that is important in the format right now, and that is dealing with affinity. And that's gonna do it for today's video, guys. Let me know what you think about these new cards. Do you like them? Dislike them? Do you think, oh, there's ones that could potentially see play, or do you think these are absolute trash? Let me know down in the comments section below, and make sure you tune in tomorrow as I will be going over the rest of the spoilers from last week that we did not cover today. As always, guys, I hope you all are having a wonderful day, and I will see you all next time.